Next question. Please hit the microphone.
But I'm having difficulty understanding it. Professor Adcock?
Could you put the microphone closer to your mouth? It's hard
Is
to
that
hear.
Professor Adcock? I'm not sure I have your name correct.
Yes, that's correct.
I'm having difficulty understanding whether you feel there are any limits at all on how we can treat a person who's classified as an enemy combatant. I mean, are we entitled to torture him?
Again, they have rights. They have a lot of rights. Under the law of war is where you look to what those rights are. No, you cannot torture them. I'm not like Alan Dershowitz, who advocates the use of torture warrants on people. I'm to the left of him on that issue. No, you may not torture him. That violates the Torture Convention. And since the 2006 Hamdan case, we cannot engage in what is way down here called degrading or humiliating treatment, which means we can do nothing to them. We can feed them, and that's about it. So no, we can't do anything to them, and nor should we. I don't advocate torture, again, as Professor Dershowitz does in the case of a ticking time bomb, terrorist. No, you cannot torture.
Now, suppose as a man who's called an enemy combatant, we have information, he's sitting in New York City. He's not on the battlefield or anywhere. What are we entitled to do to him?
Yeah, if the president designates him as an enemy combatant and the president has that authority, then that person can be detained indefinitely until the war is over. And if we have information that he has committed a violation of the law of war, we can charge him with those crimes in a military commission. If we don't have such information, then under the law of war, enemy combatants can be detained indefinitely until the war is over. Those are his rights. Those are our rights.
But only if he's, but I mean, as we were told, if he's caught on the battlefield, it's one
Well,
thing.
the battlefield is the world. I mean, in World War II, where was the battlefield? I mean, it was everywhere. This battlefield is not restricted. President Obama is killing people in many countries around the world, not just Afghanistan. So the battlefield is the world. If you're at war, you don't say, well, we're at war, but we can only fight the war on this little part of the chessboard. It's the entire chessboard.
I don't want to take the time of the audience for personal argument with you.
I wasn't going to ask this question, but you just gave an example of what my real problem with your point of view, is that you engage in circular reasoning. Somebody behaves a certain way, therefore, we can conclude that there is war. Therefore, they have a right to do certain things. That's circular reasoning. You can't justify a behavior. You can't justify an action by doing it. That means that there is no limit to anything the president can do. If he can just, by his behavior, assume certain things, and then you justify what he assumed by his behavior. It's all circular reasoning. I don't really you just did it now.
Yeah, no, it's not circular reasoning. Your reasoning is circular because my reasoning is based on what our three branches of government has told us. I'm not making this up out of whole cloth. The authorization for use of military force, read it. That's the basic foundation that we are engaging in war. How's that circular reasoning? The 2006 Military Commission Act, the 2009 Military Commission Act. I'm assuming that Congress passed these laws, which they did. I mean, these are black and white laws. You can look them up and read them. That's not out of whole cloth. The president, under the Constitution, has the authority to make war as a commander-in-chief.
How can you make war if it's not declared? Therefore, if you make war, you can say that
we've only declared war in 5 wars in our history. By your logic, the other 195
I think we should
are illegal.
move on here.
That's not logical, ma'am.
Thank you. Next question.
All right. My question, I guess, is more for Professor Herman. If you're advocating that these suspects be brought into the American criminal justice system, as it's been established throughout history, and therefore afforded all of the rights, such as Fourth Amendment rights, Fifth Amendment rights, how do you square that with the fact that a lot of the evidence that's being found against these people is being gathered by American soldiers in Afghanistan who are not versed in, a warrant requirement before they enter into somewhere, or Mirandize someone after capturing them who might make a statement that can then be used in an American court against an enemy combatant? Would you suppress those statements? Do you afford full due process? Or would you subject the American criminal justice system to a lower standard in those cases in order to allow that evidence to come in?
I don't think it's a matter really of a lower standard. I think there is already a lot of flexibility in the American criminal system. For example, the courts have held generally that you don't have to get a warrant to obtain evidence overseas, because where are you going to find a magistrate to get a warrant? The Fourth Amendment does not apply to people in another country who are not American citizens, period. So they have no Fourth Amendment rights. So, that the courts have already decided. Miranda is a little bit tricky, because I think most people misunderstand what Miranda says unless you've had criminal procedure. Miranda does not say you have to give somebody warnings before you perform a custodial interrogation. Miranda says you cannot admit a statement that a person has made in court unless you have given them the warnings first. So what happened with Mr. Abdul Muttalib when he was arrested was the agents were not primarily interested in getting evidence against him to be used against himself. They were primarily interested in finding out what he knew about al-Qaeda connections and trying to see what useful information they could get. That was fine. Miranda says they can do that. They can question him all they want. But what they can't do is they can't use information that they obtain from his mouth against him. The reason for that is that the Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination, which is our commitment to the adversarial system, says when we are trying somebody in court, what we don't do is we don't call the defendant into the dock and say, okay, did you do it or not? Where were you on August 16th? Did you throw that grenade? That's the inquisitorial system. They do that in France, they do that in other countries. It's just not our system. In our system, you don't have to give evidence against yourself. So there's been at least one judge, Judge Sand in New York, ruled in the first, what was called the Bin Laden case, the first World Trade Center bombing. He ruled that if in fact evidence was obtained, if somebody made a confession against themselves, it could not be used in court against them, but for the reason that we could not require somebody we're trying in an American court to take the stand and say, did you do it or not, because that's not the adversarial system. What we believe is that the government has to be able to prove that somebody has done something before we lock somebody up for a really long time. Now, in terms of should there be alternatives, let me see finally, I think a place where our country has missed the boat for a long time is I think there should be international tribunals that would be capable of handling some of the kinds of situations that we're talking about, that would not necessarily be purely American courts and American rules, because we are really talking about a global problem here. And if you know all the rules of international criminal law and et cetera, there are a lot of different rules. But to me, neither the American criminal model nor the war model, the military commission model, takes account of what a global problem this is. So I would much rather see us supporting some sort of real international criminal court where we could get together with the other countries of the world in the same way we did in the Geneva Conventions to try to settle what do we do in a war. To settle, what do we do with global terrorism? I would love to see us cooperate in some endeavor like that instead of doing it all ourselves.